Hi, Maria. Welcome to the Wild Rose podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So, we are going to dive into talking about your latest book, Herbal Gut Health, which I'm super excited about. But before we go there, I would love to hear a little bit about your own journey to becoming a herbalist.
Yeah, I think, like many people, there are a lot of different ways in which it wove into my life. But sort of the short, long version, I thought the idea that plants had healing properties was pretty cool from a young age. My mom had a little book on it, and but we didn't practice it. It wasn't something that was really reality. And then I went into my degree in journalism in college and started deciding, oh, hey, this is a great opportunity to learn more about this topic and write about it for my assignments. And still, it was just theory. And then I had a very stressful and traumatic experience in college. And at some point, and from there, I developed a little bit of anxiety and insomnia. And somewhere along that healing journey, it dawned on me that herbs might be helpful, that I could maybe just go beyond reading these little beginner books and writing articles about it for my classes to trying out some herbs. And from there, it really, took over my life in a good way and just really fell in love with the herbs. At the time, I just walked into a local herb shop and they gave me kava and valerian, which was very popular in the 90s. And they were indeed helpful for me personally. And of course, I did a lot of other work too. It wasn't just about the herbs, but the herbs really were a great sort of set of training wheels to help get my nervous system in a better place. And so then I just really deep dove with my journalism. I ended up working for Natural Health magazine and covering their herb beat and running their fact-checking department. And as I left the magazine, I really wanted to work with people more. And I became fascinated with the idea that one could become an herbalist, like these people I had been interviewing and reading their books. And so I started to sign up for different programs. So I did a beginner program with Nancy Phillips that borrowed on Rosemary's correspondence course. And then I went to the Southwest School of Botanical Medicine, had the opportunity to study with Michael Moore, who is definitely one of my primary teachers as far as the style of herbalism that I practice. He was just a heavy influence on me, although all my teachers were, of course. And then from there, I did Rosemary Gladstar's advanced program, which was Rosemary plus a lot of other great teachers. And I had a wonderful opportunity. This is like the early 2000s that I decided to start, studying herbs, that not only did I get a chance to meet so many great herbalists that are kind of our herbal elders through Rosemary's program and through going to conferences, but when I had been at the magazine, this was right around the year 2000 or so, and so many great herb books were coming out around that time. It really was one of our big renaissance times for herb books. And so I got free copies. I got to interview people, so many people I got to learn from and just ask them questions as part of my job. And so that was a fantastic opportunity alongside like working in natural food stores and little things I did on the side while I was building my education. So that's kind of how it all came to be. I eventually opened my practice full time in 2007 and gradually transitioned from writing articles in magazines to writing more books. And so I teach, I see clients, and I write. So all of what I do is really more about the education side of herbalism versus the technical. I did used to run a apothecary for doing custom blends for my clients. And of course, I have herbs in my garden, but I've never been too heavily on the product side of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to the getting to interview people about herbs.
It's pretty
That's
cool.
it's I'm really grateful that I get to have this experience and talk to such incredible people. And I'm always learning so much from all of these wise people in the herbal community. It's really amazing. So, you've written a few books, but your latest one is the one we want to talk about, and that is Herbal Gut Health, which I'm super excited about for lots of reasons. There's a lot of folks out there who are dealing with digestive problems these days. This seems to be a huge problem for so many people and really limited success in managing these for a lot of folks. Now, I'm really interested in exploring how herbs can help us, but I'd also like to just sort of get an overview of the digestive system. I do know When I was starting learning about holistic health, there is a saying in many communities about how, all health starts in the gut, or all disease starts in the gut, or that's where we always want to be looking for imbalance. So let's talk about the digestive system. What does it really encompass?
Yeah.
What's going on there?
And if I'm not mistaken, these concepts of it all starting in the gut are not new by any means. Some of our best, early medical professionals who are also herbalists, people like Hippocrates and Ibn Sina, or Avicenna is the anglicized way of saying his name, also really focused on the gut as one of the areas of aspects of health. And we have the digest. So you want me to kind of go through the digestive system and sort of how it works? I just want to
Yeah,
make sure
let's
I'm
talk
on.
about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
so all of our listeners can just get an idea of what we're really talking about here.
Yeah. I mean, mechanically and chemically, the digestive system is focused on breaking down food, mechanically and chemically. So, mechanically would be things like chewing your food and having muscles in your stomach that really like churn it around. And then we have a lot of different chemicals, so like stomach acid, saliva, enzymes, bile, that also chemically help break down the food. And so through these two methods, we break it down into the smallest pieces. And then a lot of the second half of our digestive system, most of the breaking down happens in the upper GI. And then as we kind of transition through the small intestine, we start to focus on more of the assimilation, the absorption of nutrients and other compounds that we've broken down from the food, which will ideally get into the body elsewhere to build things, make things, fuel things. And so much, it's important what we eat, but it's also really important how well we can digest, because you could be eating the most amazing diet, but if you're not assimilating it well, that could be a problem if you're not breaking it down and absorbing it. And then, as we get towards the lower end of the GI system and part of the colon, we start to wring out the fluid and make it to more of a feces shape so that we can excrete it out. And it's also a really important system of detoxification, because it's one of the easiest ways to get waste, day-to-day metabolic waste as well as toxins out of the body, is through our daily, hopefully daily-ish, bowel movements. And so there's so much that ties in with the gut, and that's just barely scratching the surface. That's just a super mechanistic, basic look at it. But we also have a lot of nervous system involvement. We have the whole microbiome, which is all over our body, but a lot of it is in the large intestine and the lower GI. And that has so many ways, all those little microbes have so many ways that they interact with our bodies in both positive and negative ways. And our stomach acid plays major roles in not only breaking down food, very importantly, chemically, but also helping to kill pathogens and supporting our immune system. And so there are so many ways that the digestive system interact with our overall health. And it's probably impossible to be like super vibrantly healthy if your digestive system is at a tremendous loss, because we're not fueling the body and all of these other ways that the digestive system interacts with our mood and our emotions, our cardiovascular system, our immune system, so many different ways that it interacts with the whole body, will probably not function quite so well. So focusing on the gut is important, but we also see this huge increase in just GI problems in general. So a lot of people come into an herbalist or other practitioner's door saying, hey, like my digestive system just clearly isn't functioning well, and this alone is giving me distress, because they, have constant diarrhea, or they're terribly constipated, or they have major gas and bloating, or some other thing going on that maybe they've got acid reflux or something along those lines that is disruptive to their daily quality of life. But then on a deeper level, it's impacting their whole body health as well.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes so much sense, and it's hard to with digestion being such an important part of our body getting the building blocks it needs to function. Of course, when that is compromised, there's gonna be downstream issues that come up, and yes, I know, there's many parts of the digestive system and all these different fluids involved and all these different areas and parts and relationships between the bacteria and the functionality and the physiology. But one of the ones that I'm really curious about, because this has become much more talked about these days, is the relationship between our nervous system and our digestive system. So let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah,
What's actually, we call it, the gut mind connection, or the second brain, sometimes the gut is called. So, yeah, tell me more about that.
Yeah, even with that, we could be looking at it on so many different levels. The way that the nervous system, our mood, our emotions, our nervous system, which of course our mood and our emotions are only one aspect of our nervous system, but they are a big one, and the gut, and it's also to some extent, hormones, so like the endocrine system as well as the nervous system and how it kind of manifests in our mood and through the digestive system. So we do have a vagus nerve, and we have several nerves that we call the vagus nerve, and they connect our brain to a lot of other places in the body, including the gut. And so that's one very direct way in which the brain communicates down to the gut and the gut communicates back to the brain. And it seems that from some of the science that while the gut can choose to ignore what the brain is telling it, that when the gut sends messages up back through the vagus nerve, that the brain has to listen. So the gut actually has quite a bit of power, if you will, over how the brain and the nervous system and all of that are functioning. Um, we also have a lot of very direct ways in which our nervous system and our gut connect. So that we tend to really feel in our bodies. So when we're really stressed out, our body is focused on fighting, fleeing, surviving. And in that mode of survival, our ability to break down and digest and absorb our nutrients is a lower priority because if you're fighting or fleeing the saber-toothed tiger, how well you break down, that little, weed salad you just ate really doesn't matter. You need to move the muscles and get the oxygen in and get out of there or fight your way out. And in our modern life, of course, we're in this sort of stress mode on a very regular basis. And so that means that there is less attention going on to through the nervous system through to the digestive system. So the stomach acid production and the digestive enzyme production may weaken a little bit. The motility may slow. You could sometimes go in both directions. Sometimes when people are under stress, their body says, forget about this, let's let it out. So for some people, they just, things just rush through their digestive system when they're stressed. But oftentimes we just see everything kind of slows down and gets sluggish because the nervous system is just saying, this does not matter right now. And if we're always in stress mode, we can also see that what's happening in our digestive system can stress us out. So if you're somebody and you're going through life and you have to have, you know, 10, 15 bowel movements a day, that can impact, thankfully not many people are that extreme, but I have had clients who were, and, that impacts their quality of life because their ability to get through a grocery store run or take a plane somewhere or whatever is really impacted by their need to have a sudden urgent bowel movement and worrying about that. So folks may actually become homebound because they don't want to have an accident or just go through that embarrassment and stress. Maybe they're having a lot of gas and bloating and they're physically uncomfortable and it becomes physically like stressful for them to have that gas and bloating as well as the embarrassment. A lot of people have gas and bloating and they'll report about how, they're really nervous. They're going to be in this meditation class or this yoga class and they, are embarrassed by how, and they'll consider not going because of the stress and the embarrassment of it. And so there are a lot of different ways that our stress and our nervous system interact in both directions. And we see this a lot that when people have gut issues, they tend to be more stressed out, and that having things like anxiety and a lot of stress in the life can be a direct trigger. Sometimes it's the only trigger of the digestive system problems. And when you get the stress in a better state, their digestive system improves. I've certainly seen that in my personal life as well as in my clinical practice. So.
Yeah, that's a really challenging feedback loop to have as well with the, stress fueling digestive issues, which fuel the stress more. So, what are some of the strategies that you have found to be helpful with that typical presentation?
Well, Of course, it's always individual, so it depends on what specifically is going on with that person and also who that person is and how they, kind of come into the world and how their digestive scenario is unfolding. So we're going to look at their energetics and what symptoms they're having as well as just, their overall being and try to support them as best as possible. So it varies, but oftentimes we do look at herbs like carminatives often are really helpful. So these are aromatic herbs that tend to have nice, strong flavors and aromas. They're usually very rich in those volatile essential oils. And those compounds have a pretty profound impact on the nervous system and our emotions, as well as on the digestive system. And so these are herbs that often will aid digestion. They help break down food a little bit better. We hear a lot about bitters, and bitters are great too. Bitters will help us digest our food and produce more digestive enzymes and all of that. But carminatives also engage our nervous system to break down our food a little bit better and to function better. They also support our motility, so they can enhance the motility so things move through instead of just being kind of sluggish. Prokinetic is one of the ways that we might refer to them. But in addition to that, they they also relax spasms. So when there's physical tension in the digestive system, those aromatics tend to go into that smooth muscle tissue and just relax it on the nervous system, and they can do a lot of similar things where they go in and just just kind of relax the nervous system a bit. And some of them have other mechanisms of action beyond just their aromatics too. But we know that aromatics alone have a very profound and often very quick action on the tissues that they come in contact with, as well as our nervous system, our emotions, our mood when we inhale them. So we could be thinking about just basic digestive carminatives like fennel and cardamom and nutmeg and ginger. But also, we've got a lot of great herbs that fall into that category. And sometimes they're a little bitter too. And they also profoundly impact the nervous system. So I love motherwort, which is a not very aromatic carminative. It's very rich in oils, but we don't really smell them in the same way, but it's so bitter and it's so relaxing. And so that's an herb that really I started working with more towards the end of writing the book and kind of like threw that in there as like, oh yeah, this is a really great bitter carminative nervous system herb. We have things like catnip. Catnip's such a wonderful herb that's bitter, it's carminative, and it's relaxing. We have chamomile, of course, as being a classic bitter, carminative, and relaxing herb. There are just so many really great plants that fall into these categories. And some of them taste really good. I mentioned a few there that are bitter as well as carminative, but there are some that just like taste really good. So maybe a little less of a direct emotional herb, but Korean licorice mint or anise hyssop are both closely related and so delicious, a lot like fennel or mint. Mints can engage us. Lemon balm can engage us, especially when it's fresh.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear and just explore that the real interconnectedness of the entire body, right? And how there is so much nervous tissue in our digestive system. So our nervous system is always reacting and working with that system. And I remember hearing, I wish I could remember who'd said it. And if you know this saying, then please remind me. But it was when people are overwhelmed, give them bitters.
Oh, yes. That is David Hoffman. No, no, wait, that's nettles.
That
David
was
Hoffman
oh
said,
yes,
when in
that's what I
doubt,
know the
give
nettle.
nettles, which I think he was specifically talking about nutritives, I think I've heard, but he's like, it's fine. I'm okay that it's been, expanded. But I know that, and maybe somebody has said, when in doubt, give them bitters. I remember David Winston actually said something to that not exactly that, but David Winston back when I was studying with Rosemary, and he did one of the weekends there, and he was like, like bitters and digestion, if you get people sleeping and you get people digesting, not everything goes away, but a lot of things do. And so probably a lot of folks. And then James Green talked about like bitter deficiency syndrome, if you will, that we have a bit of a bitter deficiency here in the United States and in a lot of the more developed nations where we've turned to stress and processed food as our daily MO.
Right. And we carry a lot of anxiety, overwhelm, unprocessed things, which is so interesting because that action of bitters in the digestive system does help with the assimilation, the organization of those, physical compounds, but it's actually doing a very similar thing with our emotions and psyche. So that
Mhm.
interplay it's just amazing about herbs. I love exploring, talking about that, and that's something that I see and have experienced myself. So I imagine you've also seen that with folks. As digestion improves, so does other emotional or mental health symptoms potentially.
Potentially, yes, for sure. I know that there are some practitioners of mental health that have looked to just simply supporting the microbiome and giving probiotics as a way of enhancing mental health, which hasn't been a direction that I've gone quite that like literally personally. I usually take a little bit more of a, I have a lot, we have a lot more allies in our ally kit, if you will. So I usually am not just going to say, oh yeah, probiotics if your mood is really off. But it's pretty cool that it can potentially help like that. So yeah, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that microbiome too, because that's another something that's come more into people's consciousness, I think, in the last decade or so, maybe a little longer. But again, yes, of course, as herbalists, we're always looking at all the tools that we have and things being interconnected. And there are many different things we can use to support. There's usually not just one course of action or one thing someone's missing or needing, but probiotics, gut microbiome, prebiotics, all of these things are definitely part of a gut protocol, would you say?
Oh yeah, oftentimes they play a role. Not always, they're not always my first go-to for everybody, but they're often very profoundly helpful. And they're certainly an important part of a healthy gut, whether or not you're taking them supplementally, but just having your beneficial bacteria, eating your prebiotics, having those critters present in the digestive system in a beneficial or commensal way versus lots of pathogenic ways is very, very important. And we did find one of the statistics that's not in the book that I came across shortly after it was published was that during the pandemic, cases of IBS literally doubled during that time. And some of that may have been from stress and isolation and all the things. And then some of it may have also been through diseases and other impacts because, COVID did impact the digestive system too. So I think it's probably a little bit of a lot of things, but we do see all of those, many of the cases when we see IBS, which is basically a diagnosis doctors give when they don't, fits sort of the patterns, but everything else has been ruled out because there's no real one way to diagnose. And we as herbalists don't diagnose here in the United States, but the gastroenterologists do. And they're like, well, you've got these symptoms and we can't figure out why. So we're going to say you have IBS. And so oftentimes we do see a stress gut component. We often see a microbiome component, and there could also be food sensitivities and other things, but there's really no one clear cause of it all. But and SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, certainly another thing that's associated with the microbiome that we've seen a huge awareness of, and so it's getting diagnosed more, but it also really does seem to be occurring more often too. It's not just getting diagnosed more, it seems to be increasing more in our population. And so supporting our gut is can be complicated but very helpful.
Right. And so, of course, the gut microbiome, that's all the bacteria. And there are, I believe, more bacterial cells in our body than there are
About
actually
10 to
human
1. Yeah.
cells. So we are, very much these beings are part of us,
Mhm.
have a lot to do with our health overall. And in SIBO, that's the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, there's specifically like a migration of bacteria that maybe shouldn't be there. So what are contributing to these? Do you know of, things that contribute to these imbalances and these issues with our gut microbiome?
Yeah, there's probably a lot we still don't know. We're always learning, but it does seem that some of the things that can impact this, one is just simply having subpar digestion to begin with. So if your stomach acid is reduced, that can be a major trigger for SIBO because our stomach acid, even though most of it is neutralized before that, that sort of food liquidy substance is excreted out of our stomach, it usually gets neutralized just before that because hydrochloric acid can burn a hole through the floor, but it's still a little acidic. And so that little bit of acidity actually helps prevent a lot of microbes from migrating up into the small intestine. They should be more in the large intestine, further down. But if we don't have good stomach acid, it creates an environment where they can grow better. And so we start to see more microbes appearing or migrating up into the small intestine or other areas like, H. pylori is another microbe that many people have, but we tend to see a big problem when it is taking place like in the stomach, and it's going to have an easier time being there if there's not a lot of stomach acid. It also can reduce stomach acid, which is makes things even trickier for folks. So stomach acid, so having good digestive juices so that we can kill off microbes where they don't belong and let them be further down the pike where they do belong. We also have introduction, just getting exposed to pathogens can sometimes create an opportunity for them. Certainly with H. pylori, there does seems to be like an exposure components of certain cultures and different areas of the world, it might be more prevalent because of the exposure to it. We also have motility as being a big thing. So if our motility is slow and sluggish, that allows for more pathogens that maybe aren't so great to overproliferate or move further up into the small intestine. And so that can happen just because things are sluggish and slow, but it can also be we also see a problem when people are eating really, really frequently, which we love to do, and I like to snack too. But when we're eating really regularly, our digestive system doesn't have a chance to do its big clean out between each meal, and we do have this migrating motor complex that goes through between meals and just kind of like cleans things out to get ready for the next meal. And if we're constantly eating, the digestive tract doesn't have that opportunity to do that. And it allows more sort of debris to just kind of hang around. We don't have as good of motility. And so it can allow for more microbes to grow where they don't belong. Certainly, if we're not eating healthy diets, then we may not be eating enough of the good prebiotics to feed the beneficial bacteria. But also, if we're eating a lot of like sugar and processed foods, that tends to encourage the more pathogenic microbes to grow. And this is where that whole gut brain thing is fascinating, because when we start to develop an overabundance of those microbes that love to feed off of sugar and all of that, they will start to shift the metabolism. So it can be one of the factors that can aggravate diabetes progression and appetite regulation, because they want to get the body to like make, consume more of the foods that are feeding them. So it's not the only, things are bidirectional and probably more than bidirectional, but it is fascinating that these microbes can actually reprogram our own brains to say, oh, hey, forget that salad. I don't want to feed the good microbes. I want to feed these other microbes that are, hacking my brain and telling me to eat that piece of cake instead. So those are just a few of the different things that impact our microbiome. Certainly antibiotics can, and other antimicrobials, but especially antibiotics. And sometimes they're life-saving, but it's like taking a flame torch to this beautiful garden. And if you take a flame torch to a beautiful garden and then you just leave it and you don't do anything to reseed it and tend it, oftentimes the weedier species, and weeds are good in the herbal world, but they're not necessarily, the weedy microbial species are not necessarily what we want a preponderance of in our gut. And so that can be a problem if we're not tending that after antibiotics and reducing our use of antibiotics to only when they're absolutely necessary.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good thing to bring up and also have awareness of for especially folks who grew up in a certain time of where antibiotics were very much overprescribed. And of course, like you said, they are yeah. They
Child of the 80s
life
lived on
saving. We are
amoxicillin.
so grateful to have antibiotics. However, they come with their own set of, considerations, and that's one of them. And I think another thing that you had brought up, brought a thought up was about our stomach acid. And that's another place where modern treatments can fall a little bit short and not really complete the picture. And that's with things that reduce stomach acid, right? Like PPIs to help manage, those are the proton pump inhibitors to help manage the symptoms of things like indigestion, heartburn, GERD, ulcers. While they can be helpful in a short term situation, if you continue to suppress stomach acid, like you were explaining, it's so important to actually keep regulating the microbiome, to helping to digest food. So, staying on these things for too long can actually contribute to further symptoms down the road. Again, yeah.
Yeah, and we're even seeing infants being prescribed proton pump inhibitors now when they have reflux, which is, colic reflux is pretty common in kids. And so now they're prescribing these PPIs to infants. And studies are showing that when children are getting prescribed PPIs, that they develop more food allergies, food sensitivities, and even like severe life-threatening drug reactions. It impacts our just so much of our being. So I remember Michael Moore talking about this way back when, and then now I'm seeing it pop up in the literature. And that was that when we don't have good digestive function, we're not breaking down our food as well. And then we get more compounds that like get further down in the digestive system in a less broken down state. And the immune system says, hey, gluten, you don't belong here. You should have been broken down into smaller amino acids by now. So I'm going to mount an immune system response to you because you don't belong here. And now maybe we're going to get some inflammation in the gut lining. And now maybe things start to get a little bit leaky and things start floating to where they really don't belong. And the immune system mounts a bigger reaction. And, that could have all started simply from not having enough stomach acid to break down that food in the first place. And so it's probably not the only factor at play, but it does seem to be one of them. And so it's really unfortunate the way that these PPIs, sometimes they are life-saving. If somebody has an acute ulcer, it might be really important to take one to suppress the acid so that the tissue can heal. Certainly having reflux that goes unchecked can develop into esophageal cancer if it's not treated properly, either conventionally or, finding herbal ways to support things. So I'm not saying that like just don't take them and muster through, but they have their place, but they're way overused, as you're saying, and have a lot of negative downstream effects, and are probably one of the widespread use of them is probably one of the reasons why we are seeing an increase of situations like SIBO that really thrive in that low acid environment.
Mm. Well, Marie, we're so lucky to have your book and to have this information about the whole system, how it works, how we can help support ourselves, and really, I've come to understand the that just educating people about their bodies is such an important part. Not everybody wants to or is going to become a herbalist on their own, but there is still a lot. We kind of all are, though, in a way. If you cook with spices, you're already a bit of a herbalist, and it is easy to incorporate. But even just, your book is incredible and so comprehensive with the way you're looking at the systems, describing those relationships, how things interact. And what I've certainly come to understand is when people get more curious about their own selves, they're able to take better care of themselves. And that's not something we're necessarily encouraging in a bigger societal way. Our systems are fairly authoritarian in a way of like even our healthcare system. We're not taught a lot about what's actually happening within our bodies and how we can be in touch with that. So I'm just so
Yeah.
grateful that, we've got you're sharing that
Yes.
information with us.
Thank you. And yeah, let's flip the narrative to the positive side of things. So I know when I do teach my like gut healing class, it's like, and this, and this, and this. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is so depressing. But then there's a slide that says, but here's the sexy part. And that is that the digestive system is really responsive to a lot of things, including dietary changes, mindfulness, focusing on the stress and mindfulness side of things, as well as herbs. Herbs do so many really cool things that while modern medicine has its place and there are times when it's life-saving, there are so many ways in which herbs can have a pretty profound, sometimes fast-acting, sometimes slow-building impact on the digestive system and do so many really neat things that modern medicine can't do to or doesn't seem to be focused on, at least as far as reinvigorating healthy digestive juices and supporting healthy motility and enhancing good digestion and helping to actually like support the healing of the gut lining, not just shutting down the acid to give the gut a chance to heal, which has its place, but actually supporting that healing process. And so we have so many wonderful herbs, and a lot of them, not all of them taste good, but a lot of them taste good. And we develop a taste for the bitters. And so after a while, we learn to like the bitters too. And there are so many great ways we can integrate them into our lives through tea blends or herbal oxymels or adding something to your seltzer or your water. And of course, there's the possibility for pills, but there are actually a lot of our best digestive support herbs usually are coming in a more experiential format like food or teas or extracts or something of that nature.
So, in the book, you do have a wonderful and comprehensive framework for this gut repair called the 5 R's of gut repair. Why don't we walk through that and, yeah, dive into what that looks like?
Yeah, and you'll see like a couple different versions of this 4 or 5 R's. I didn't create the concept; other folks did. I'm not actually sure who, but and you'll see them sometimes defined a little bit differently. But the way I view it, so first off, we have remove, and so that is trying to figure out for that individual person what things are problematic for them, what things are aggravating or causing the issue, and removing those. So maybe it's foods that are really irritating. It might be a food sensitivity or an inflammatory food or, a high sugar food if sugar seems to be one of the triggers for that person. Or it could be removing through, say, like antimicrobials for pathogenic overgrowth. So it's not always about diet, but oftentimes there's a dietary component. It might be, maybe we can't remove the stress, but it might be addressing the stress if stress is one of the components. So if trying to figure out what are the triggers or the causes? Sometimes it's the underlying cause, sometimes it's just a trigger, and trying to the best of our ability remove or reduce those. The second step is to replace. So we don't want to just say like we're just going to take these things away and have fun, but trying to find really nourishing, easy to digest foods that aren't problematic and maybe even helpful to replace in, for example, the diet. And so finding really nourishing soups and stews, or, sometimes I had a client who had a lot of GI issues. It turned out, we eventually discovered, she eventually was able to get a diagnosis of celiac, and she had many other sensitivities too, but she had gotten to such a limited diet because she had so many food sensitivities. So yeah, you could just keep taking this food away and that food away and this food away. But the thing is that when people start developing food sensitivities, oftentimes it's this ever growing list. So we want to find things that are really helpful and supportive. And so a big strategy for us was just finding nourishing foods to add back into her diet, along with trying to get to some of the root causes and the healing. So replacing is the next step. And let me refer to my list to remind myself what comes next. I know I have it on here. Here we go. Repair. So repair, of course, that's like half the book pretty much is on the repairing. We spend, a good first chunk of the book on the digestion enhancement and, kind of how getting things moving and digesting well. And then the second half of the book is about the repair process and gut healing. So this, from an herbal perspective, can be turning to mucilaginous herbs like marshmallow root is one of my favorites. Marshmallow leaf is also great, but there are many other mucilaginous herbs that coat and soothe and form a protective barrier and support the healing process. It could be vulnerary or wound healing herbs. So my favorite tends to be plantain leaf is one of my first go-tos. Love throwing that into tea blends or powder blends, but there's so many. We've got go-to koa, we've got yarrow, we've got, licorice does a little bit of both mucilaginous. So we have so many wonderful herbs and a few supplements too that help actually support that repair process. And that can be, we can get some immediate results and some immediate soothing impacts from our repair things. But for deeper level damage, usually we're talking about like a year or two of consistent consumption of whatever that is to have the deeper impact on their repair process. It also depends on the scenario. And then reinoculate, and that would be to support the beneficial gut bacteria, so supporting the microbiome through probiotics and prebiotics and, encouraging a healthier microbiome, and then restoring, at least the way I view it, is, enhancing the digestive juices again. So if the situation was really damaged, you might not be able to throw a bunch of vinegar and bitters at somebody's digestive system to kick up the stomach acid. It would be like rubbing acid into a wound, literally. And so they just might not be ready for that right away. But later, once things are healed, more healed and all of that, we want that stomach acid and those digestive juices and enzymes to be restored. And so going in and supporting that through perhaps like bitters or vinegar or carminatives or whatever that may be. And sometimes you can do all these things at once in one protocol. Sometimes somebody only really needs a few of them are more important than others. Sometimes you really do kind of have to go through in a very stepwise fashion, especially if things are quite damaged. You might not be able to do that restore. Or if you've got a lot of dysbiosis, sometimes adding in like prebiotics just make the gas worse. And so maybe you need to work on a few of those, underlying imbalances and the motility and all that first. And then later you can start to work that in. So sometimes people have to go through steps. It's not always in this exact order, but this often is a common order to work on things.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, and one of the things I really appreciated in your book, Maria, was the realistic timeline you also share with this healing process. And I think that's something that can be a little challenging for folks who are newer to working with herbs, is that it often does take some time to really get deep work done. And try to remind anybody too that, think how long it takes to develop the problem. The herbs are actually working very fast in
Yes.
relationship to compared to how how long it can take many years for of sort of constant, poor eating or overload of stress or all of these different factors that contribute to the issues before they really start manifesting in really problematic and disruptive symptoms. So, anywhere from, yeah, it sounds like a year to two really to do a full overhaul in the
And it's
digestive
important to note that
system.
people do start feeling better
Yes.
sooner than that. Oftentimes, you notice a difference, sometimes within like a half an hour of taking
Yeah.
the herbs, that things, oh, this feels a little better. And then sometimes, it's a couple weeks or so, but usually it's going to be a gradual progression. But to expect to see, a major difference on like an endoscopy or something like that, usually we start to see that after about like 1 or 2, especially 2 years is usually when I've had clients come back and be like, oh, wow, that damage they saw is like, they're impressed. It's not there anymore. I'm like, well, I can't say the herbs did it because herbs aren't allowed. We're not allowed in this country, at least in the United States, to say those kinds of things, but they're pretty
What a fun
awesome.
coincidence, huh?
Yeah. What a
Yeah.
coincidence. You've been drinking that gut healing tea most days for the last 2 years. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I wanted to go back a little to something you mentioned briefly before about leaky gut. This is something that's certainly been in the awareness for a while now. People have been talking about it. The way you explained what's happening there is very made a lot of sense, very clear. And I'm also curious if this has to do with. I know that you sometimes are a little cautious about the low FODMAP diet, which is often used for SIBO. So is there a connection there, like avoiding these food allergies and sensitivities or yeah, what's why would
Yeah.
yeah. Tell me more.
So there are a couple different things, but yeah, so with the leaky gut, I mean, and that's one of the less conventionally um approved, if you will. I mean, there is a concept that's in the scientific literature for increased intestinal permeability. So I mean, the gut lining should be somewhat permeable. I mean, it's part of its nature that some things get through, and we have these tight junctions to hold the right things in and the wrong things out, and all that. And so as inflammation occurs, or also with certain food sensitivities, like sometimes some people are more responsive to the gluten. Sometimes we'll do this by upregulating zonulin hormone, but not always, not for everybody. But we sometimes will see those tight junctions open up a little bit more, and so that does allow more things to kind of float around the digestive system that don't belong and can be problematic. But and there can be a connection to SIBO or any kind of dysbiosis, really, that might be yet another thing affecting those tight junctions. But getting to the FODMAP thing, so FODMAPs are I can never remember all the right words. I always usually have to look at the list. I've got it in the book, but it's like oligo, polyol, saccharide, disaccharide. It's all these complex starches, and they're in certain food. We've got a couple different categories of them, but they're in certain foods like garlic, onions, beans, um, gluten. Gluten has a lot of different reasons why it might not agree with somebody's digestive system. One of them is that it is a relatively high FODMAP food. Not all, but much of the dairy out there is high FODMAP. And some of our prebiotics, if people get like massive gas and bloating from taking a probiotic, I might wonder, especially if it's got those fructooligosaccharides in it. Those are prebiotics. Chicory root has inulin, which is a prebiotic. So does dandelion root. And so usually people get a lot of gas and bloating when they eat these foods. Sometimes they also get reflux, which that's usually a red flag for me when I see somebody who decided to take a spoonful of slippery elm powder or marshmallow root powder, some really strong like mucilaginous herb, or sometimes it's burdock, but especially like those, other herbs that are typically very soothing for reflux, but happen to be rich in this um, mucilaginous prebiotic starch that is within the FODMAP group. And if it bothers their reflux, if they get more like heartburn from it, I'm like, you might have something like SIBO. You could go get it tested to find out. And the conventional treatment is lots of antibiotics, and then hopefully they do probiotics, and maybe it goes away. Often it comes back. But a very popular diet is this low FODMAP diet, and they do know that when people have SIBO and also when they have IBS, that if they go on these low FODMAP diets, that they often feel a lot better. They have less gas, they have less bloating. If they have reflux and it was due to this particular pattern, they might have less reflux as well. And so people are like, great, that's it. I'm on this diet. I feel better. That's my cure. And I think sometimes it's presented that way, and it got a lot of attention because it is one of the few diets that's been shown to really reduce symptoms dramatically. But it does not address the root cause, and it does not get rid of it. It just makes the digestive system more like copacetic with the current scenario. So I'll use the analogy that we have all these critters, for SIBO, you've got these critters that have migrated up into the small intestine. And when you eat those foods that are high in those complex starches, it's like they have a keg party, or they don't digest them very well, and they ferment them in that upper stretch of the gut. And so you get gas and bloating because they're basically farting and belching all over the place, and then that creates the symptoms. But they love to eat sugar and and they love those simpler foods. You could eat rice day in, day out, and that doesn't make them have gas and bloating, but they're still there. In fact, you'll kind of encourage them to be there a little bit more often. And in the meantime, you're starving out the good bugs further down that really love those prebiotic foods, that's what helps them grow. And so it can be a complicated situation. And I might encourage somebody to eat a low-ish FODMAP diet while they, just to control their symptoms while they actually address the dysbiosis with antimicrobials, with increasing stomach acid if they can handle that, with, healing the gut if they need to do that before they can enhance the stomach acid, support, bigger spaces between meals so the migrating motor complex can do what it does, support prokinetics like those carminative herbs to help move food through so we don't have a chance for it to sit and ferment quite so much. But the low FODMAP diet doesn't make things better. And if you're on it long term, it actually makes things a little worse because people find that their healthy food selection gets lower and lower and lower. And whenever they try to introduce anything back in again, it's just everything just comes back. And they might end up with bigger problems further down because if you're avoiding all those healthy fibers, you're, as I mentioned, starving out the beneficial bacteria in the lower gut. And so, one, their numbers might go down, but also the critters that are there that are hungry because they're not getting the good critters aren't getting their preferred food, they'll start to eat the mucus lining of the gut because they're so hungry. So then we can end up with more gut lining damage as a result. So it's not that following a low FODMAP diet is the end of the world, but it really, I wish it was recognized more that it is not the solution. It can pose if you're on it long term, it can pose some of its problems. It's a temporary symptom reduction management technique. And the goal is to address the problem and then slowly expand that diet to get most or all of those foods back in again so that we can eat a healthy diet. It's slow. SIBO is tricky. It's not an easy overnight kind of approach, but yeah, that's the gist of all of that.
This is really interesting to hear too. It's reminding me of something that has come up from in my own journey with herbs and learning about healing, and that's that it sounds like really a very well functioning, well resourced digestive system can eat anything. Obviously, not all the time. Like, but if things are going well, you can have those things that are triggering in certain conditions. You can eat them in moderation, and things work fine. And this is a reminder to me, too, that health, what I've come to understand, is more inclusive than it is exclusive. There are times when we do need to, yes, limit certain things. Of course, we can't overdo it on, eating cake and candy and drinking alcohol all the time. Like all of these things, of course, do need to be in moderation, but being able to experience and having, a body that has some resilience because it's well cared for is
Yeah.
really the goal that I want for myself and my health and about trying to being available for all the experiences that life has to offer. And I think that comes to with our capacity for, stress and tolerating discomfort and in our, moving through the world, all of those things, very
Yeah. I
holistic.
100%, yes. I totally agree.
So, Maria, what can we do at home? What are some of your favorite things that people can be doing on a day-to-day basis just to help support their digestive health?
Yeah. Well, first off, it will depend on the person and where their gut is at. So if they're in a really like unhealthy state, then figuring out like what's going on for them and what categories are going to be most helpful. There's no one herb or food or anything that's always right for everybody. But, one category, of course, are the bitters as well as the carminatives. So the bitters are those herbs that are really bitter. They enhance digestion. They engage the senses. They tend to be very grounding. And then the carminatives that we talked about earlier, the aromatics that also enhance digestion. And classically, we often combine them because they just pair really well. They both categories enhance digestion and motility through slightly different ways, and they work well together. And then also energetically, bitters tend to be very energetically cold, and the carminatives tend to be energetically warming, and together they make a more balanced formula. If you just did like super strong bitters all the time, it can actually pose some problems for the digestive system long term. So, but adding that carminative, something warming like ginger or fennel or whatever to it makes it better. So, incorporating those into your daily meal routines, if you're at a space in your digestive system that you can handle that enhanced digestion, then that can be really helpful. So, and that's can be super simple. It can be eating a bitter leafy salad just before or just after your meal. It could be black coffee is something that is very bitter, and very popular throughout the world. So black coffee, it has caffeine and it is a little bit on the acidic side, but it is a digestive bitter. So sometimes people will just do that. Or you could have something maybe a little bit more herbal and less caffeinated, like a dandelion root tea would be a really great potential remedy. It does have a little bit of the FODMAP. So if you were super duper FODMAP sensitive, you might get a little gassy. So slowly introduce it. But, a little dandelion. I've got a tea recipe that I love that's in there that's for dandelion root along with like roses. And you can add a little bit of chai spices to it. And it's really quite tasty. And you can have it with your meal to enhance your digestion and help stabilize your blood sugar. And it helps encourage a healthy appetite. So people with a low appetite can actually develop a bigger appetite, and people who are craving lots of less nourishing foods usually will find that their cravings shift so that they're craving less sugar and feel more appealing about eating their vegetables and whatnot. So bitters and carminatives are great, and there's so many ways. Another simple way of working with that is an extract, because you don't really necessarily need a big dose of them. So you can extract them in vinegar, you can extract them in glycerin, or you can extract them in alcohol, and then just add a little syrups technically too. But I usually prefer the prior three. And then just add a little of that to your salad dressing or to a little bit of water at the beginning of your meal, um, or you can add it to your seltzer. So lots of different ways that you could incorporate. Cocktail bitters come from this concept of bitters and carminatives. And so if you have, clean cocktail bitters that don't have a lot of weird artificial dyes and flavors, you could just add that to a little bit of seltzer and enjoy that, especially at the beginning of your meal will prime the pump and help you digest your food a little bit better. So that's, one big simple group of things that could just pick any one of those that appeals to you, or maybe throughout the day you do different things at different meals. It is classic that in most cultures, like in our traditional cuisines, incorporated something bitter or something aromatic in the context of a meal to engage digestion. So that's probably a classic. If somebody's in a really damaged state, they may not be tolerant of that right away. They might need to heal their gut first. But for pretty much everybody else, adding some bitters is good. If you want to support like the healing of the gut lining and just a healthy, vibracious gut lining, then we're looking at more of those soothing, demulcent, and vulnerary. So sort of the gut healing teas are one of my favorite ways to do that. And, just a basic would be marshmallow root or leaf with maybe a little bit of plantain for the extra vulnerary support. Vulnerary meaning kind of like wound healing. And then a little bit of something to flavor it. So that could be holy basil for the nervous system and because it tastes good and it's carminative. Or it could be chai spices, so the masala. And technically, chai means tea, but the westernized version of it would be like the masala spices. So the cinnamon, the nutmeg, the cardamom, the little bit of ginger to enhance the flavor, and it kind of warms it up and adds to the digestive capacity of the tea. And so it could be that as a way of just supporting your gut healing. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, this is a great reminder too. Herbs are for everybody. They are, accessible for most of us, and especially like you described, like just in our cooking. They're traditionally used in all cooking. Many foods are herbs and, considered both. And then, of course, our spices. And that's, yeah, just what a great way that we can all start incorporating a little bit more of that into our lives. And yeah. And of course, if you want to learn more, you can pick up Maria's book, Herbal Gut Health. It is beautiful also. I really, really love the colors, the paintings. It looks like there's watercolors throughout.
Yeah, I actually I should know. I was just thinking about it because I was playing with watercolors myself the other day. I was like, what kind of paint did she use? I should know because I follow her on Instagram. But yeah, Anna Farba, I believe was her name, did a lot of
Mm.
all the botanical. I actually got some that are hanging up on my wall after I
Oh,
learned
nice.
she also did Rosalie's Wild Remedies, Rosalie and Emily Hahn's book, Wild Remedies illustrations too. And so yeah, and then they also got an illustrator that I believe her name is Caitlin, who did the sort of more artistic renderings of the digestive system for the section changes. And then they had another person who I don't remember their name right now, unfortunately, who did the more anatomy and physiology, because I wanted people to be able to see like, what does a tight junction look like? What does it look like when it's not healthy? And so they had three different illustrators that the publishers hired, which was so great.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
great, and it was really helpful when going through the book to get that, to be able to understand and visualize what's happening, and there's so many recipes and a lot and deep dives into the herbs. We didn't dive as deep. I mean, we could do a whole talk
Yeah.
on plantain. That's one of my favorite herbs too. Well, they're all my favorite. One of my most reach for maybe is the better way to say that. But yeah, I feel like we could have done a whole hour on plantain. But of course, there's so much in the book about the individual herbs too for
Yes.
anyone
Yeah,
who
we have really
wants it.
nice profiles on each one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Maria, it's been just a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you so much for having me and for sharing, sharing this information about my book and gut health, as well as, all the different folks that you talk with. It's really great that we have opportunities to learn for free out there. So thank you for offering this.
Where do I send people who want to learn more about you and your work?
Wintergreen Botanicals is a great spot. So that's my website. So wintergreenbotanicals.com. And you can also Google me. I'm pretty Googleable, Maria Herbalist, maybe New Hampshire thrown in there. And so lots of information on my website. Of course, you can purchase books. If you're in the United States, you could purchase books through me. There are bonus goodies for that. And then otherwise, you can get it wherever books are sold. And sometimes you can get it for less money other places. So however you get the book that works best for you is totally fine. There is, just so folks know, there is a little like Easter egg in the back. There is a, let's see if I can find the page. So it's in the appendix on page 360, sorry, 336, where it's the resources and helpful websites. There is like a little web page that you can go to and a promo code, and you can get a free little mini gut course that I put together. We recorded it earlier in the year, so you get the replays, and so folks can enjoy that. And that no matter where they get the book, they can just go to that resources page and get access to that. And and I've got tons of information on my website just about health and herbs in general, as well as the things that I'm up to.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that and wishing everyone very good digestive health.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Maria.
Thank you.
Bye.